evening, everyone. Can you all hear me? Hello. Good evening. Thank you all for being here. I was trying to count up our Lambert lectures, and if I'm not mistaken, this series began in 2004. And this is now our 12th lecture. So, yes. This has become something of an annual tradition that we all look forward to, thanks to the generosity of Bill and Sheila Lambert, who I think haven't missed a single one in all of those years, coming in from New York each year. We have had the great pleasure of welcoming some truly stellar artists, curators, critics, art historians to Columbus. And I suspect that some of you in the audience will recall, and I hope fondly recall, kind of amazing evenings with T.J. Clark, Arthur Danto, John Waters, Luke Toymans, Germano Chalant, Annie Leibovitz, Christian Markley, Josiah McElhaney, Rob Storr, Diana Widmer Picasso, and others. Quite a luminary lineup, to be sure, and tonight is certainly no exception in that trajectory. In fact, as we thought about who the perfect candidate might be to speak on the work of Cindy Sherman, whose exhibition Imitation of Life is currently on view in our galleries, and will be there until the end of the year. So all of you who are welcoming friends and family for the holidays, we hope that you'll make the Wex one of your stops as you're keen to entertain them all and keep them busy. But it was actually our curator at large, Bill Horrigan, who with customary brilliance suggested that we invite Douglas Crimp this evening. His recently published book, Before Pictures, really beautifully combines autobiography with cultural history and personal memoir to sort of bring to life what is now a sort of vanished moment in the art world and the New York City art world, to be specific, when his own emergence as a critic and exhibition maker very happily collided with an utterly new generation of artists emerging at that time as well. A group that he himself would indelibly dub the so-called pictures generation. In the many years since, Douglas Crimp has continued to play a truly seminal role in shaping cultural critique around contemporary art, initially as founding editor in 1977 of the influential journal October, which he continued to edit for over a decade, and later as a visiting professor at many very, very respected universities across the country, culminating in his role since 2002 as the Fannie Knapp Allen Professor of Art History and Professor of Visual and Cultural Studies at the University of Rochester. But that doesn't really begin to convey the extraordinary intellectual muscle with which Crimp has shaped and, in some cases, one might say, moved critical thought over the last 5 decades. It is an astonishing output of books, of exhibition catalogs, individual catalog essays, articles for journals and anthologies, exhibition previews, exhibition reviews, keynote addresses, endowed and invited lectures, of which we are proud to now be one, conferences, seminars, panels, and the like. I think those of you who are in academia, you are accustomed to these very dense resumes, but there was something about sort of scrolling through Douglas's that was truly remarkable because so many of the names and the moments were familiar to me, and I suspect would be to many of you as well. It's kind of a dizzying and dazzling experience all at once. And because of that, in fact, it's still kind of perplexing to me that with so many admired colleagues and artists and peers, curators, historians, the like in common, that Douglas Crimp and I had never met until just yesterday. I'm completely flabbergasted by that. But thrilled that it has finally happened, albeit way too belatedly. He did actually visit the Wexner Center once before to participate in a lecture series entitled AIDS, Art and Social Action, but that was in 1992, slightly before I arrived here. And so certain was I that somehow our paths had crossed that I was mistaken to think, I know he's written for a catalog essay at the Wexner. I know he has. But as always, Bill had to correct me. We can still do something about that. In any case, the truth is I felt kind of intimidated at the prospect of finally meeting the Douglas Crimp, so formidable a figure after all these years. But as I learned yesterday, and I imagine all of you will this evening, he wears his reputation lightly and is anything but unapproachable. So I am certain that you are in for both an enlightening and an entertaining lecture this evening. And I'd have to just add on a personal note that just leafing through the book Before Pictures, which he will be signing in the lobby following tonight's lecture, I found someone so rare and utterly refreshing, at least in the world that we all inhabit. His candor, his courage, particularly around that seminal 1977 pictures exhibition that he organized for Artist Space in New York, which to his everlasting chagrin did not include Cindy Sherman. There is no question that he immediately recognized that she belonged there. He owned it. He rewrote the catalog essay just 2 years later. And with that, she was emphatically and forever etched into the canon. There is simply no arguing with the still reverberant resonance of his essay for that exhibition and its catalog. So with utmost thanks, as always, to Bill and Sheila, who are with us this evening, in particular to my colleagues tonight, Alana Ryder, Bill Horrigan, Bruce Bartu. It is now a truly overdue honor and pleasure to welcome Douglas Crimp to the Wexner Center.
Thank you so much. I'm going to, Sherry and I are not exactly the same height, so I'm going to raise the podium a bit. And I too I want to thank Sherry, of course, and for the lovely introduction and for inviting me, the Lamberts, and Alana Ryder, who's been a really wonderful host since I've been here and driven me all over the place and shown me all of the art sites in Columbus. And Bill Horrigan, who's a very old friend, a very dear friend, and Bill got me to break my vow that I wouldn't accept to do any new lectures to come to do this, so I'm really happy to be here. As Sherry told you, and as I'm sure some of you already know, I published last year this book called Before Pictures, which is, I try to say is not a memoir. It's a hybrid of memoir, cultural history, criticism, but much of it is autobiographical. And I wrote it over a period of 10 years, and during that time, and I realized even somewhat before with my AIDS work, and continuing into the present, I've been in a kind of retrospective mode, which might have to do with my age also. This memoir was about a decade that was my first decade in New York. It was sort of the period of my juvenilia, I call it. That I arrived in New York in '67, and in '77 I did the pictures exhibition with which I'd been associated ever since. Even though it was a tiny little exhibition of 5 artists in a downtown alternative space. So in the final chapter of my memoir, I actually talk about, as Sherry said, about making that exhibition and somewhat as well about its reception. And so in preparing that exhibition, was my first encounter with Cindy Sherman's work. And it was at the Albright Knox Gallery in Buffalo. She was in a show called Western New York, a kind of local survey of local artists. And so I write in my memoir, that I will always regret, Sherry already referred to this, that I didn't appreciate Sherman's early work fully enough to include her in the Artist Space exhibition. Her Albright Knox show contribution, lineup for Linda and from Robert, which is here, consisted of a series of 35 cutout photographs of herself in identical poses, but dressed in costumes and makeup that slowly changed from one figure to the next. It is clear in hindsight that lineup, together with other works from her Buffalo years, such as A Play of Cells, which is this work, and Murder Mystery, some of which are actually in the exhibition here, presages the untitled film stills that Sherman began making soon after she moved to New York City. So that was a little passage from the memoir itself. I attempted to make up for my mistake when I rewrote the pictures catalog essay for publication in the journal October in 1979. I illustrated the October version with Sherman's untitled film still number 21, and wrote an analysis of it that led me to posit performance art as paradigmatic for these new postmodern practices that came to be called the pictures generation. I returned to the film stills about a decade ago in a kind of polemic that I wrote for a panel discussion, and I'm going to begin with that polemic. In the winter of 2006-07, the Museum of Modern Art in New York exhibited a group of photographs in its entrance lobby, gathered together under the title New York at Night. The museum's website explained, and I quote, "This exhibition comprises over 25 photographs from the museum's collection that capture nightlife in the city that never sleeps. The glittering lights of the skyline and the legendary parties at El Morocco and Studio 54 are among the subjects that inspired great photographers from Berenice Abbott to Gary Winogrand. Also included are works by Diane Arbus, Rudy Burkhardt, Lee Friedlander, Alfred Stieglitz, and others." That was on their website. Among the exhibited works that purportedly capture nightlife in the city that never sleeps was Cindy Sherman's untitled film still number 54 from 1980, which was hung between Friedlander's New York City 1971 and Ouija's Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade in 1946. Seeing Sherman's film still in this context, I was taken aback. The Sherman work is, for me, categorically a different kind of thing than the other photographs assembled by the Museum of Modern Art. It is not a picture of New York at night. It is a picture that employs New York at night as the mise en scène of a performance. When I first wrote about the film stills in 1979, I said of them, "We do not know what is happening in these pictures, but we know for sure that something is happening, and that something is a fictional narrative. We would never take these photographs for being anything but staged." Sherman made her famous untitled film stills, of which there's a series of them in the gallery here, between 1977 and 1980. During the same period, I developed my ideas about postmodernism in a series of essays beginning with pictures and continuing with the title essay of my book, On the Museum's Ruins, and then the photographic activity of postmodernism, and the museum's old, the library's new subject. And Cindy Sherman was an important impetus for what I was doing in these essays. In them, I argued that the use of photography by a group of young artists then coming to the fore disrupted the terms through which photography as art was being promoted by the Museum of Modern Art's photography department under John Szorkowski's directorship. And indeed, at that time, MoMA's photography department and curators were openly hostile to these postmodern practices. 15 years later, they changed their position, and they bought the entire series of 69 film stills, reportedly for a great deal of money by that time. As if to dissemble the belatedness of their recognition of Sherman's achievement and to claim her for their own photographic canon, MoMA published Cindy Sherman, The Complete Untitled Film Stills in 2003. A further dissembling took place with the idiosyncratic inclusion of Sherman in New York at Night. Dissembling because the critical meaning of Sherman's untitled film still number 54 cannot easily make itself known when it is removed from the context of the other film stills and put instead in a completely different sort of company. MoMA acknowledged as much in its own publication when the museum's director stated that the untitled film stills are, quote, best understood as a single seamless work of art. Although I think seamless gets it wrong too. It is because we see the seams between photographs that we recognize these works as works of performance. As Sherman wrote in the same publication, whenever I install any of the film stills in a group, or order them in a book, for example, I try to destroy the sense of continuum. I want all the characters to look different. When I see two blondes together, I get nervous that they look too much alike. In my essay, The Museum's Old, the Library's New Subject, I recounted a reorganization of the New York Public Library's collections that entailed removing valuable photographic books from various library divisions to bring them together in a new division called Art, Prints, and Photographs. And my contention was that in the epistemological shift represented in this reorganization, something would be lost. And this is what I wrote at the time. Just as paintings and sculptures acquired a newfound autonomy, relieved of their earlier functions, when they were wrested from the churches and palaces of Europe, consigned to museums in the late 18th century and the early 19th centuries, so now photography acquires its autonomy as it too enters the museum. But we must recognize that for this new aesthetic understanding to occur, other ways of understanding photography must be dismantled and destroyed. Books about Egypt will literally be torn apart in order that photographs by Francis Frith, for example, may be framed and placed on the walls of the museum. That's the end of that quotation. For the practices of postmodern photography that mimicked this operation could be equally literal. For example, Sherry Levine tore reproductions of Andreas Feininger's photographs out of books, framed them, and showed them as her own work. Such operations resulted in what postmodernist theorists took to be a critique of modernist ideas of autonomy, both the autonomy of the artwork and the autonomy of the creating subject. And that's what I meant by the subject in the title of that essay. Both the autonomy of the artwork and the autonomy of the creating and viewing subjects. Indeed, the two kinds of autonomy were seen as interdependent. The vaunted sovereignty of the creating subject was now recognized as a masculinist fantasy achieved through the disavowal of the subject's dependent on what he looks at the cost of rendering what he looks at, the image of a woman, say, a fetishized object of his look. As has been made clear by 30-some years of commentary by feminist critics, from Craig Owens, Judith Williamson, and Laura Mulvey, to Rosalind Deutsch, Kaja Silverman, and Johanna Burton, among others, Sherman's film stills interrupt this operation of purportedly autonomous vision. When you see the film stills together, you realize easily enough that what you are looking at is a series of formulaic feminine roles rendered as images. As Sherman dons an assortment of costumes, assumes a range of expressions, poses in various settings, and employs different techniques of framing and lighting. Sherman's work is a hybrid of photography and performance that reveals femininity to be an effect of representation. But shown as it was in MoMA's New York at Night, film still number 54, 54's contrivance is easy to overlook. In this context, instead of the staging of a film noir-like image, it might be taken to be a photograph of a genuinely fearful woman walking down a dark and dangerous New York street. Does this mean that the Museum of Modern Art successfully usurped the postmodern critique of the presuppositions of photography as autonomous art and rendered it ineffectual? I don't think so. I think that one lesson we might draw from New York at Night is just what the film stills and other postmodern practices helped us understand in the first place, that aesthetic meaning cannot be rendered stable, that all photographs, and indeed all works of art, are subject to new contextualizations and new readings, including those, like New York at Night, that attempt to counter the postmodernist critique to which MoMA's resolute adherence to modernist aesthetics helped give rise in the first place. In fact, New York at Night is itself an argument against the autonomy of photography, albeit, I think, a negative one. If 27 canonical photographs from the museum's photography collection can be commandeered for the purposes of boosterism, promoting New York as the cliched city that never sleeps, the city of glittering lights and legendary parties, just how autonomous can the photographs be? Or more pointedly, if a group of photographs from MoMA's photography department can be used as a lobby promotion for Doug Aitken's outdoor video projection, Sleepwalkers, a public artwork that, although one of the work's commissioners, MoMA seemed thereby to suggest was just one more attraction of New York City's nightlife, how seriously is even the Museum of Modern Art now committed to the idea of aesthetic autonomy that the curators of Sharkowski's day held dear. Excuse me, I'm going to take a drink of water. I'm just going to give you a blank slide for a moment. So let me then turn to a very different contextualization of Sherman's Untitled film stills, one that will be effected in an exhibition that will open late in this coming January at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, called Outliers in American Vanguard Art, which was organized by curator Lynn Cook. And Lynn asked me to consider a group of artists that will appear together in one gallery. You will see that I am no longer writing polemics. This is perhaps, as I said, an effect of the writing of the memoir. And more recently, what I've mostly been writing about, which is dance. And it's had some sort of an effect, I think, on my temperament. So now you're going to see a different side of my temperament. When you see Greer Langton's Jackie O doll, your first thought might not be of the fateful day in Dallas. But with Langton's Polaroid photographs of the doll, it is. Sorry, I went. In both, so what accounts for the difference then? In both, the doll wears Langton's version of the famous pink bouquet Chanel suit and pillbox hat and holds the telltale bouquet of red roses. When you look at the doll, it's hard not to get caught up in the material particulars of the object. The oversized buttons on the suit jacket and string of oversized pearls at the neck, the exaggerated contours of the cheekbones and jaw and the excessive thickness of the hair, the near match in the pale pink color of Jackie's skin, shoes, purse, and suit, which in real life, the real life version, was a much darker pink and had a navy blue collar and pocket trim. The Polaroids focus on the face and manage to soften its contours, make it almost realistic. In two of them, the roses are brought into close proximity with the face. In one of these, the face and flowers are doubled in a mirror. In the third, the roses are absent. Instead, Jackie's hand is positioned in front of her face as if she were shielding herself from the horror of what she sees. The drama of witnessing her husband's assassination seems to be, if not enacted, then at least suggested in the photographs. The doll is just a Jackie doll. With the photographs of it, Langton gave the doll the familiar tragic story. Of course, to say that a doll by Greer Langton is just a doll is absurd. Langton's dolls are like no other dolls, and no Langton doll is like any of her other dolls. For that matter, many Langton dolls weren't even like themselves from one moment to the next. Langton constantly reworked them, changing their genders, identities, sizes, and clothes. But some, like the Jackie O doll, change by being photographed from different angles, using different lighting and backgrounds. Simple as the photographs are, they manage to bring the dolls to life, give them a story. Because Langton made their limbs manipulable, she was able to photograph Freddie and Alan in a sexual embrace, It looks tender enough, but both dolls are so emaciated, and Ellen's fixed expression is one of such horror that the story the photograph tells appears to be far from a happy one. In one photograph, Sissy, dressed in a fancy maid's costume, sits smoking a cigarette on a tenement building threshold with a perfectly real lapdog next to her. In another, the ever-changing Sissy was a chic-looking woman in a skull cap, bright yellow sweater, and high heels posed next to the Prince Street subway stop on Broadway, who for some reason has decided to pull down her skirt to reveal her penis. Morton Bartlett's dolls also had manipulable limbs, and he too photographed them in such a way as to give them stories. One Bartlett doll, though, is exceptional in having an unchangeable pose. The ballerina is frozen in a ballet arabesque. What changes in the photographs, besides the framing and lighting, are the costumes. In different photographs of the doll, she is dressed in the expected tutu and tiara, a practice leotard, a curious ensemble consisting of a long skirt, a bolero, and a bonnet, each with lace ribbon trim around the edges, a diaphanous black fabric that seems simply to be thrown over the doll, but nevertheless convincingly evokes modern dance, and the entirely non-balletic and very skimpy bikini. When Bartlett photographed his doll in the latter costume, the bikini had only recently been invented and was generally thought so scandalously revealing as to be banned. Even now, a ballet dancer in a bikini would likely be met with raised eyebrows. How much more so a prepubescent girl dancer in such a costume. Nor does the ballerina doll ever wear any sort of footwear. There's another noteworthy peculiarity to the ballerina doll and all the photographs of it, and that is the hairdo. Ballerinas, whether by that term we mean aspiring little girls in ballet class or principal female dancers on stage, almost always wear their hair in tight buns. As it is, the ballerina doll's head already looks too large, but the curly tresses really throw off the balance. This seems to have been entirely intentional on Bartlett's part. A close-up photograph of the doll's face and upper torso foreshortens the arm and foot extended behind her so as to make the doll look both uncanny and, well, doll-like. In the photograph of the modern dancer ballerina doll, the head is turned away from us. Instead of a face, we see only an oversized head of hair with a bow tied into it. It is shot from below and squeezed into tight space with its head seeming almost to touch the ceiling, and its left hand and feet cut off by the frame. The doll is posed in a box-like construction, making the background look, strangely, like a facade of the sort of performing arts venues that were built in the 1960s. Strangely, for one thing, because no such places had been built when Bartlett made his photograph. For another, because part of the facade's geometry consists of decorative lace ribbon similar to the trim Bartlett used on the doll wearing the bolero. It is an altogether unsettling image. The way the dark fabric grazes the girl's pudenda, the crinkles around the extended leg, the batwing-like aspect of the fabric falling over the left arm, the claustrophobia brought about by a combination of camera angle, disproportionate scale between the doll and the space she inhabits, and the sense of the space as simultaneously interior and exterior. Once you've seen this photograph, you start noticing something menacing or just plain odd about the others, too. The shadow cast, the shadow cast by the doll dressed in a leotard and the disjunctive scale between the doll and the baseboard, the way the lighting in one of the photographs of the doll wearing the tutu turns the extended leg into a silhouette, and as I've mentioned, the uncanniness of the close-up of the head. That one haunts me the most. What is it besides the distortion? Perhaps the way the tiara, the curls, and the flower necklace frame the face in a perfect oval, like a cameo. And yet the deep shadows add a three-dimensionality that is quite the opposite of a cameo. And a couple of sequins on the tutu that catch the light while the rest are black spots. It is, I think, an astonishing photograph, one that, looking at the doll itself, you can hardly imagine resulting from it. Thanks to the early feminist literature on Cindy Sherman's Untitled film stills, we know much about how details of costume, makeup, pose, and mise en scène, together with the photograph's camera angles and lighting, construct our notions of femininity. Of course, Sherman's subject is not dolls, but rather herself. Or might we say, herself as a doll. In fact, Sherman made several early series of works in which she cast herself as paper dolls. Perhaps living doll is the right term, connoting as it does an attractive woman, and sometimes an attractive man, regarded as a plaything. Not all of Sherman's Untitled film stills correspond to this rubric, but many of them do. Among them, the few that are more like pin-ups than film stills. The name pin-up emerged during World War II when US soldiers pinned pictures of women to their barracks walls, whether Esquire magazine's Varga Girl, which you see here, Hollywood's Betty Grable, the most popular of all pin-ups, or soldiers' own sweethearts. At first, they tended to be wholesome, but they grew bawdier as the genre developed. One can think of Tom Kelly's iconic nude photograph of Marilyn Monroe from 1949. Sherman's versions are relatively chaste, but the poses are suggestive, and like Betty Grable, she shows a lot of leg. In one, she has stopped reading her romance novel and gazes upward, dreamily. The upward gaze is repeated in another, in which she twists her body and temporarily puts down her hand mirror. Am I attractive enough? She seems to wonder. A woman reflecting on her own beauty is not what the pinup typically shows. Rather, it represents the woman seen through the eyes of a desiring male. She is as beautiful as he wants her to be. Perhaps nothing illustrates this better than the thousands of photographs that Eugene von Brunschenheim took of his wife, Marie. Not that Marie appears to have been an unwilling subject, nor are von Brunschenheim's photographs precisely pin-ups. They seem both more private and more determinedly artistic than is usual for the genre. On the one hand, their making seems, at least to me, to have been a form of the couple's sex play. And on the other, and in no way contradicting that assumption, they are unremittingly art-directed. The floral print fabrics that serve as backdrops in so many of them, while typical in a way of modest home decor of the period, they are deployed to exoticize and eroticize Marie's full or semi-nudity, even if her poses are basically innocent and the focus is equally on her lovely face. Draped, sometimes bondage-like, in strings of fake pearls, her hair festooned with flowers to match the background drapery, and, or most astonishingly, capped with gaudy crowns of metal, of fake crowns, but von Brunschenheim made metal and ceramic crowns of this type as one form of his art production. Marie is, in this case, a sex goddess. But some aspect of that modest home decor often becomes, for me, what Roland Barthes called the punctum, that accident which pricks me but also bruises me in his famous text, Camera Lucida. Gorgeous and glorious as Marie is made to appear, the back of an ordinary chair or the nubby texture of a couch, sometimes too a bit of strain or awkwardness in Marie's pose, are poignant reminders that this is a working class couple at play. That sort of punctum might be the point, or at least one point, of Lorna Simpson's work, 1957-2009, in which the artist photographed herself mimicking poses, expressions, costumes, and settings of photos of a young black woman taken 52 years earlier. The original cache of 200 pictures found through eBay shows the woman posing pin-up style, although a few also show a young black man either photographing her or posing himself. In one, he tellingly appears looking at a pin-up drawing of, also tellingly, a white woman. While Simpson imitated both female and male models, it seems clear that the impulse for the project derives from the apparent aspirational purpose of the woman in the originals. And this is a quote from Simpson, maybe in service of a potential career as an actor, a model. It was fascinating, an African-American woman in Los Angeles in the late 1950s taking on this project with such consistency and drive in a 3-month period. Simpson's imitations disclose the homemade quality of the originals by failing to replicate them exactly. Simpson doesn't hide the fact that she is different from her model in many ways. Different skin color, different hairstyle, different facial features, different body type. And those differences are further accentuated in Simpson's pictures by differences of lighting, architectural setting, furniture, and clothing, and moreover of poses, which Simpson sometimes reverses left to right. I'm not showing any of those reversals here, but it happens within this very, very large series. The greater naturalness of the originals is revealed through Simpson's slight ineptness in trying to duplicate them as not really so natural at all. The woman is playing a role, indeed likely showing that she can play a role, can be a pinup, a model, or an actress. Additionally, Simpson intensifies the consistency and drive that she saw in the 1950s archive by her own consistency and drive to mimic them and by displaying them as an archive. Although Simpson selected for imitation what she deemed the good shots among the photographs, there were, she remarked, very few that she didn't use. 1957-2009 consists of 123 photographs, both originals and Simpson's copies, which show, as much as they show anything else, the very process of imitation. In fact, 1957-2009 is an imitation of an imitation, for the young woman in the originals, too, is posing as an avatar of ideal femininity. Her obvious joy in playing that role is heartbreaking, since it is a role that in the social world of 1950s Los Angeles would almost certainly be denied to an African-American woman. While Simpson found and recreated an archive of old photographs of an African-American woman presumed to be on the sidelines of the Hollywood film industry, Cheryl Dunye and Zoe Leonard created their own archive in the Faye Richards Photo Archive. Only a few recall the pin-up style photographs that Simpson's subject made. They are less pin-ups than the sort of Hollywood glamour photographs that movie magazines circulated to fans in the industry's heyday. One is even signed Fay. Leonard was scrupulous about historical accuracy in making the photographs, and the pinup is a photograph type that postdates Fay Richards' glamour period. She used different kinds of cameras, different kinds of papers to make this archive. Others appear to be film stills in the sense that Cindy Sherman's are. That is, photographs staged to look like a scene in a film. Still others provide a different kind of narrative. They appear to be production stills taken on the sets of Richards' films. The encompassing narrative here is that of Donnier's feature film, The Watermelon Woman, in which Donnier's character embarks on a search for information about a black actress of the 1930s and 40s, credited in the films in which she appeared only as the eponymous Watermelon Woman of the film's title. Portions of the Fay Richards photo archive appear at various moments in the film as Donnier uncovers the story of the woman who has become her obsession, with many more of the photographs finally appearing during the film's end credits. Thus, the archive serves in the Watermelon Woman's narrative as an accumulation of clues that gives us the ever more complete portrait of Fay Richards. Importantly, the Fay Richards photo archive does not achieve an equivalent sense of resolution when it is shown simply as a series of photographs. It is, as all archives are, incomplete. The genius of the archive is precisely in its being an archive, a constructed one, that can exist as an autonomous work apart from the film. It comprises a broad range of photographic genres in addition to the glamour portraits, film stills, and production shots. Formally posed family photographs, professional photographs of Fay as a nightclub singer, snapshots taken with different types of amateur cameras, of Fay and her lovers throughout her life and career, at home, at work, with the gals in a lesbian bar, out and about in public. With the archive, Donnier and Leonard invent a life story by making photographs that purport to record it. Crucially, different sorts of photographs taken by different sorts of people. Unlike the woman in the 1950s photographs 1957-2009, which we can presume were all taken by the man depicted in a few of them, those few likely, in all but a few of them, those likely few being taken by the woman herself, Leonard has made the presumed photographers of Fay Richards into shifting personae existing over an extended period of time, about 5 decades. So these would include Hollywood cinematographers, glamour photographers, technicians on movie sets in the 1930s and 40s, family members, friends, and or lovers taking snapshots, all the way up to the 1980s. We understand the person Fay Richards differently depending on whom we posit as the one looking at her through the lens. Does the composite complete the picture, or does it complicate it? Does it matter that Fay's lovers were women, butch women? In her photographs, Lee Godey is always the one who looks. At her dolled-up self as she presents herself to the photo booth camera that is her instrument. And indeed, looking is one of her subjects in both her photographs and her paintings. In the photo booth self-portraits, Godey might stare straight ahead with an extravagantly fixed gaze. She might look up, down, or left or right, and she might look knowingly at what she holds in her hands, a fistful of money, for example, or one of her prized silver goblets. She also accentuates her eyes, outlining her eyelids and adding eyelashes. Whether on her face before taking the picture or on the photo after the photo booth spits it out. Of course, she often paints her cheeks and lips too, but her treatment of her eyes strikes me as more significant. Look at her portrait paintings, self-portraits and portraits of her movie star models. Look at the eyes. The portraits are pictures of eyes. Eyes wide open and staring, eyes bigger than any eyes could ever be, closed eyes, cat eyes, eyes surrounded by halos of kohl or crazy long lashes, just like what Godey draws on her photographs. In the profile portrait paintings, even the lips are eye-shaped. But maybe my focus on the eyes leaves too much out. The portrait paintings are sometimes also pictures of hats and hairdos. A red-headed Gibson girl, a bushy blonde do with a headband. Godey's own hairstyles vary too, but she makes great use of hats. But she doesn't resort to wigs. It's always her own hair. And it's not always that pretty. By the time she became an artist, Godey was a woman of a certain age. She might retouch her photographs, but she leaves her wrinkles and often messy hair as they are. Her photographs are her signature, quite literally, when she attaches them to her paintings. In one of these, she photographs herself holding one of her paintings. In fact, the very painting the photograph is attached to. In another, she holds a photograph of herself similar to the photo she's taking. The mise en abîme is, I think, an insistence. This is me. I am the artist as well as the subject. In this respect, Godey seems just the opposite of Cindy Sherman, whose persona, insofar as it shifts from one to another in the Untitled film stills, says, "This is not me." Sherman sometimes relied on someone else, like Robert Longo or Helene Weiner, to take the photograph. But whether actually or figuratively, it appears to be someone else who looks through the lens. As has long been noted, Sherman's Untitled film stills are photographs of to be looked at-ness, which is Laura Mulvey's idea. It's her formulation. Sherman composes herself as an image for another. As Mulvey theorized to be looked at-ness with regard to the women in classical Hollywood cinema, and I quote here, "She holds the look, plays to, and signifies male desire." Unwittingly confirming Mulvey's point, the critic Peter Sheldall wrote of Sherman's Untitled film still number 54, "I'm in love again with every look at the insecure blonde in the nighttime city." So we return actually to the idea of this as being actually a realistic picture of New York City. Further elaborating to be looked at-ness in visual pleasure and narrative cinema, Mulvey notes a conundrum, and I quote, "The presence of woman is an indispensable element of spectacle in normal narrative film. Yet her visual presence tends to work against the development of a storyline, to freeze the flow of action in moments of erotic contemplation." End of the quote. The anonymous photographer who shot some 950 Type 42 Polaroid photographs of female screen actors most certainly froze the diegetic action. But the moments he chose, and I can't imagine the anonymous photographer isn't a male. Cindy Sherman actually wrote about these photographs and posits that it could be a female, but given that he's written the measurements of the actress on the top of the photograph, it seems a little unlikely to me. Sorry, I have to find my place. These photographs of the female screen actors most certainly froze the diegetic action, but the moments he chose are not the erotically charged and narrative-breaking close-ups Mulvey had in mind. Shooting his pictures from the TV screen around 1970, thus about a decade before Sherman made her Untitled film stills, the anonymous artist of these photographs captured moments from movies and television series that only rarely date from the Hollywood classical period that is Mulvey's target. And indeed, the moments he chooses are not moments of woman as spectacle, but rather women acting. That is, women furthering the action. They are caught mid-sentence or shown listening, reacting, looking skeptical or quizzical or enchanted, as if this anonymous photographer was resolutely drawn to the shot, reversed shot structure of so many, I would actually conjecture most, movie and TV scenes. The presence of a man on the other side of the shot structure is insinuated. Only once in this whole series is a male actor actually shown. It's Sean Connery in Thunderball. It is striking that the anonymous photographer didn't wait for a close-up of the actresses, which would have made it far easier to capture a satisfying image of them. On the contrary, he favors moments when he had to move quickly to arrest his subjects mid-action, which causes fascinating facial distortions and blurs. The inclusion of portions of the TV monitor framing the movie, extreme close-ups of the TV screen, thus close-ups of close-ups, shots taken at an angle to the screen, all of these formal strategies increase the distortions. The photographs by Type 42 Anonymous thus recall Sherman's Untitled film stills only to end up showing us how entirely artificial the latter are. They give the lie to what I wrote when I first encountered them. I say they are like quotations from the sequence of frames that constitute the narrative flow of film. I see now that they really aren't like film stills in that sense of a segment like a frame enlargement, but rather that they are like film stills only insofar as film stills used to be still photographs taken on the film set during the filming. So they're actually not what's going on in the film, they're staged on the film set. Sherman remains a touchstone for me when it comes to artists making photographs of women, or rather photographs of imagined, desired, or performed femininity. All four of the outlier artists here, that is Bartlett, von Bunschenheim, Godey, and Type 42 Anonymous, took their photographs before Sherman made her Untitled film stills. But I think we see their work differently because of the prominence of Sherman's project, the prominence that it has gained over time. Do we now begin also to see Sherman's work differently because of theirs? There's no question of influence in either direction, whereas by contrast, clearly Simpson or Donier and Leonard certainly did know and inevitably referenced the Untitled film stills. I'm less sure about Greer Langton in this regard, and indeed it's harder to make a case for Langton's works as belonging to a series or creating an archive than it is for the work of all of the other artists that I've been discussing. Since even if you take her work in a single medium, and she worked in several, it doesn't constitute a series. The works are decidedly individual if thematically related, and sometimes, of course, the same doll is photographed many times over. For something approximating an archive, I think we have to bring her work in all mediums together in the way that she did in her final installation, exhibition. It's called It's All About Me, Not You, now a permanent installation at the Mattress Factory in Pittsburgh. Recreating her own work in her own room in Chicago at the Mattress Factory in idealized, aestheticized form, It's All About Me comprises dolls, drawings, photographs, both by Langton and of her, and Patti Smith and Devine and so many others, memorabilia, furniture, detritus, and more. The installation presents a dark, even morbid world in which femininity is experienced mostly as pain, even if there are also occasional flashes of beauty and happiness, or maybe even if is wrong. It's all about me, it seems. The price of beauty is an endurance of suffering. In this way, too, Langton's work differs from Sherman's, Donier and Leonard's, and Simpson's. Yes, the latter contemporary artists picture femininity as something you work at that's impossible ultimately to achieve, but their pictures are not nearly as gloomy as Langton's. Leonard says about Faye Richards, and she speaks of her very much as a real person, in many ways, her life was determined by the political realities of her day. Sorry, I'm giving you the wrong image there. Did I have that on the screen? Okay. In many ways, her life was determined by the political realities of her day. She was hampered by racism, sexism, and homophobia. And yet she had a great life. She was beautiful, she had love, she had a lot of joy and a lot of pleasure. She had intelligence and she had agency. She made choices. The series, The Archive, taking photograph after photograph, each one attempting something similar, are essential means by which to see femininity as a project, a task, an obsession, a duty, a game, a pleasure, a joy. I keep wondering if masculinity could inspire anything like this. The answer is probably already there in the fact that it hasn't. Thank you. I'll be out by the books if anyone wants to come and have a book signed or just chat with me or whatever.